Vladimir Komarov, Soyuz 1. On April 23, 1967, Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov launched aboard Soyuz 1, becoming the first person to knowingly fly a spacecraft he believed might not survive the mission. The Soviet Union had rushed development of the Soyuz program in an attempt to outpace America's Apollo missions, but engineers had already identified hundreds of technical problems during testing. Critical systems, including the parachutes, power supply, and attitude controls, were all considered unreliable. Despite repeated warnings from engineers and fellow cosmonauts, political pressure from the Kremlin forced the launch to proceed. Komarov understood the danger. If he refused to fly, his backup pilot Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, would take his place. Unwilling to let his friend die in a defective spacecraft, Komarov accepted the mission himself. Shortly after launch, Soyuz 1 immediately began experiencing serious failures. One of the spacecraft's solar panels failed to deploy, cutting power generation in half and preventing proper orientation toward the sun. The spacecraft began tumbling uncontrollably through orbit while Komarov fought desperately to stabilize it using manual controls. Mission Control quickly canceled the planned follow-up mission and ordered an emergency re-entry after only 18 orbits. At first, the descent through Earth's atmosphere appeared normal, but at 23,000 feet, the main parachute failed to deploy correctly due to a design flaw engineers had warned about months earlier. Komarov activated the backup chute, but it tangled with the partially deployed main parachute, leaving the capsule falling almost completely unrestrained. Ground stations recorded Komarov's final transmissions as he realized there was no chance of survival. Moments later, Soyuz 1 slammed into the ground at more than 250 miles per hour, instantly killing him. The crash destroyed the capsule and forced the Soviet Union to completely redesign the Soyuz spacecraft before future missions could continue. Soyuz 11 crew. 4 years later, another tragedy struck the Soviet space program. On June 6, 1971, cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev launched aboard Soyuz 11 on a mission to occupy Salyut 1, the world's first space station. The mission was considered a major achievement for the Soviet Union. For more than 3 weeks, the crew conducted experiments, performed observations, and proved humans could live in space for extended periods. After successfully completing their mission, the crew prepared to return to Earth on June 29th. The undocking and re-entry sequence initially appeared flawless. The spacecraft separated from the station correctly, completed its deorbit burn, and descended through the atmosphere exactly as planned. Parachutes deployed properly, and the capsule landed gently in Kazakhstan while recovery teams rushed toward the spacecraft expecting to greet national heroes. But when rescuers opened the hatch, all 3 cosmonauts were dead. Investigators discovered that during descent, a pressure equalization valve had accidentally opened while the spacecraft was still in space, causing rapid decompression. Without pressure suits, the crew lost consciousness within seconds and suffocated before the capsule ever reached Earth. The tragedy permanently changed spacecraft safety procedures, leading to mandatory pressure suits during launch and re-entry operations. Challenger disaster, STS-51L. On January 28, 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger prepared for launch from Kennedy Space Center with 7 astronauts aboard, including schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, selected as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. Overnight temperatures had fallen far below normal launch conditions, causing concern among engineers responsible for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. The engineers warned NASA that the cold weather could prevent rubber O-ring seals from functioning correctly, potentially allowing hot gases to escape during launch. They strongly recommended delaying the mission, but after intense discussions and mounting pressure to avoid another postponement, management approved the launch anyway. At 11:38 a.m., Challenger lifted off into clear skies while millions watched live on television. For the first minute, everything appeared normal. Then, 73 seconds after liftoff, one of the O-ring seals failed exactly as engineers had predicted. A jet of superheated gas burned through the shuttle's external fuel tank, triggering a catastrophic explosion. The shuttle broke apart high above the Atlantic Ocean. Although the explosion itself likely did not kill the crew immediately, the crew cabin continued falling for nearly 3 minutes before striking the ocean at tremendous speed. All 7 astronauts were killed. The disaster shocked the world and grounded the shuttle program for nearly 3 years, while NASA redesigned the boosters and overhauled safety procedures. Columbia disaster, STS-107. On January 16, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia launched on a 16-day scientific mission carrying 7 astronauts. During liftoff, a large piece of foam insulation broke away from the external fuel tank and struck the shuttle's left wing at high speed. Engineers requested detailed military imaging to determine whether the impact had damaged the spacecraft, but management dismissed the concern, believing foam strikes were not dangerous. Unknown to the crew, the impact had punched a hole in the wing's thermal protection system. For over 2 weeks, the astronauts carried out their mission normally, completely unaware the shuttle had suffered fatal damage during launch. On February 1st, Columbia began re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. As the shuttle descended at more than 17,000 miles per hour, superheated plasma entered through the damaged wing, melting the internal structure from the inside. At 8:59 a.m., while flying over Texas, the weakened wing finally broke apart. Columbia immediately lost control and disintegrated across the sky, scattering debris over hundreds of miles. All 7 astronauts were killed instantly. The accident led NASA to implement far stricter inspection procedures and new methods for repairing damage while in orbit. X-15 Flight 3-65-97. On November 15, 1967, Air Force pilot Michael J. Adams flew the experimental X-15 rocket plane on a mission designed to test flight at the edge of space. The X-15 was one of the fastest aircraft ever built, capable of reaching altitudes above 50 miles and speeds exceeding 4,000 miles per hour. After being released from a B-52 bomber, Adams ignited the rocket engine and climbed into near space successfully. But during the high-altitude portion of the flight, the aircraft developed a dangerous yaw motion that gradually worsened as it descended back toward Earth. At extreme altitude, Adams had little aerodynamic control, and the aircraft eventually entered a violent spin. As the X-15 plunged into denser atmosphere at hypersonic speed, the forces acting on the aircraft became overwhelming. Traveling at over Mach 3, the rocket plane broke apart under intense aerodynamic stress. Adams likely lost consciousness from extreme G-forces before the aircraft completely disintegrated. The wreckage crashed into the California desert, making him the first person to die during a spaceflight. The tragedy exposed the dangers of operating at the boundary between aviation and space exploration and led to major improvements in high-altitude flight control systems.